If I'm sitting watching this video or listening to this podcast right now, and I think, wow, that's something that would really enhance my brand, my sales, my profile, venturing into mainstream media, how would I go about, who do I approach, and what do I say to them to get a start? If social media is your main mechanism of leverage when it comes to making more sales, and your product is either you or your service or something that you sell, then you already know about the relentless pursuit of growing your brand and the value of increasing your followers and subscribers. The bottom line is, the more eyes on you, the greater your influence, the bigger your opportunity, and ultimately, the more money you'll make. But here's the thing. If you're serious about skyrocketing your audience to 1 million followers or more, there's a secret weapon that not many budding online entrepreneurs know about, yet it's being used by many top influencers to explode their growth. And paradoxically, for those social media influencers, their secret is mainstream media. Now, think about this for a moment. What separates a superstar rock group like U2 from that incredible covers band that you think are brilliant who are playing at your local pub? The difference is the size of their audience. Well, the same applies to online entrepreneurs. To truly stand out, you need more than just great content or a great service or even a great product. You need a massively engaged audience that recognizes your authority. And that's where mainstream media comes in. You know, when I think about some social media influencers who have followings of over 1 million people or so, people that come to mind like Celeste Barber or the comedy team Sushi Mango, Inspired Unemployed, or even the world's best covers band, Piney Street Country Club, just to name a few. While they may have started building their personal brand and audience on social media, what they didn't do was just rely on social media to build their followings. What they did was leverage mainstream media to legitimize their personal brand, and they reached audiences that social media alone simply couldn't touch. If you take a look at virtually anyone online who's got over 1 million followers, what you'll find is that each of them has mastered the art of blending their online presence with the credibility that only traditional media can provide. And it's this action that's ultimately made them household names. Now, today on the podcast, I'm joined by Chris Smith, who at the peak of his career became a household name. Now, for those of you who don't know Chris, he's a veteran broadcaster and media personality, and today he runs an incredibly successful media trainer company that teaches people who already have reasonably sized followings on Instagram or YouTube exactly how to take the exponential steps to blow up their brand by leveraging mainstream media. Now, Chris has spent decades in the media world, interviewing some of the biggest names, from prime ministers to rock stars to industry icons and category experts. And today, through his company, Media Trainers, he helps individuals become go-to experts or commentators on mainstream media. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Good to be here, Mark. Thank you.
Chris, a lot of people are convinced that mainstream media is dead. And when we look at the prolific growth just in the last really few years of things like YouTube and Instagram, is it fair to say mainstream media is dead and that social media has taken its place?
Not a chance. Social media, I think, is complementary of mainstream media. And all you got to do is look at the numbers. Yes, there's a depletion of followers, of cumulative audiences for television, radio, and reading newspapers. But what we've found is they still have a base that is respected, especially in a place like Australia, we still don't have legacy media being beaten by digital media. Now, that's not the case in the United States and the UK. You've got news social media platforms, digital platforms like, for instance, GB News in the UK, which is outrating some of the BBC news channels, which is outrating some of the AM radio stations, talk radio stations, etc. So we're seeing the change. We're seeing legacy media, mainstream media being beaten by what began as social media and now has stepped up as mainstream social media.
Mm-hmm.
That hasn't happened in Australia. So in the Australian context, the answer to your question is be very careful that you forecast the death of mainstream media just now. Now, that may happen. We may get to the stage where the financial backers of the 7 networks and the radio stations and maybe even some of the newspapers tend to say, no, we don't want to invest in that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We will go solely online.
Mm-hmm.
We will develop a family of digital portals, and that's the way we will disseminate our news. That's the way we will disseminate information, and that's the way we will sell advertising. I think that will happen. But it's all very premature to start writing off legacy media. I think there's a feeling that because legacy media is not doing as successfully as it once was, we used to have, for instance, lifestyle programs launch on a Sunday night on Channel 9 and Channel 10 and Channel. It would be the biggest thing in the country.
Burke's Backyard, for instance, Friday night.
Doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen anymore. And so the level of success is very different. The expectation of success in mainstream media is very different. But do not forecast their death just yet, especially in this country, because it still has clout, it still has large cumulative audience, and it still has influence.
Sure. I work with a lot of online entrepreneurs and successful ones at that who have built reasonable size audiences, 100, 200,000 followers online, that still have this urgency around their brand to keep growing. Yet inevitably they hit this ceiling where really their next step is to become somewhat of a go-to expert on their category or whatever it is that, is their area of expertise. Yet, because of the fact that these people are predominantly 40 years and under, their appreciation of the cut-through of mainstream media is somewhat missing. And so they just keep focusing their efforts on, building their following on social media, yet they don't realize that to be able to get a spot as a talking commentator, for instance, on a breakfast television show or a breakfast radio show, or to even be profiled within a page 1, 2, or 3 article in the national newspaper, would provide them with a significant, if not exponential, growth to an audience and a level of legitimacy that perhaps they can't obtain, or is going to take a long time to obtain, just doing what they're doing. So given that perhaps a lot of these people have a lack of appreciation of the mainstream media and the mainstream media's audience, can you perhaps categorize what differentiates the audience of, let's say, a very popular mainstream television channel to the general audience that might be available on YouTube or Instagram or some other social media platform?
Well, the main difference is you are not going to get commercial leverage instantly like you would
What do you mean
online.
by commercial leverage?
Well, for instance, if you are selling a financial package on your social media output, your platform, your podcast, you're going to get people who you have their undivided attention, whether they watch it live, if that's what you do, or whether they download it and they watch it at length. So they watch something that's 25 minutes in duration, but it's a captive audience. What you don't have in the mainstream area, and you mentioned television breakfast, for instance, you've got a very small time spent listening. So people are ducking in and ducking out.
Mhm.
They're on the way to work.
Mhm.
They're on the way to dropping the kids at school. They've come back from all of that. They're going shopping. They're only getting bite-sized information. So they're not there to commercially extract what you have to offer.
Yeah.
So you are not going to get, and if that's your thing, if you want to flog, that's fine.
Yeah. But
But
you're
you're
not
not-
going to get this full-scale sales pitch in, is what you're saying.
You're going to get some wonderful brand reputation
Yeah.
and brand awareness. Now, you can't underestimate that. Talk to any marketing person about brand awareness. What you'll find is that when and if that audience in mainstream media wants to think about what to do with their extra savings, when they want to think about what to do in terms of buying property, they will have the brand awareness reinforced by what they saw on mainstream media, and they'll act then.
Yes.
So there's a delayed commercial benefit for those who are usually broadcasting on social media. That's the difference, I think, in the behaviour of that audience. But that is not to be underestimated.
And do you think that someone who makes a foray in mainstream media automatically gains a legitimacy that they can't otherwise obtain on social media?
Well, for someone who has great respect for social media and gets what they want from social media and has nothing to do with mainstream media, no. But you've got a huge cumulative audience still gravitating towards television, radio, newspapers, and swinging in and out of all of that still in this country. They see a legitimacy, exactly what you're talking about. They see a legitimacy if someone appears in their lounge room, if someone appears on their phone while they take a break from work, they are on the mainstream. And so therefore there's an instant respect, there's an instant gravitas that comes, I think, to the minds of those who still get their information and their entertainment through mainstream media. And you can't underestimate that. And there might be, for those in the bubble of social media, they might frown upon mainstream media as old media.
Sure,
it's old. It's traditional. It's wavering without a doubt. But do not underestimate the power of it and the respect it has, and therefore the respect that you can get when you appear on it.
So along with that respect comes some do's and don'ts about being on mainstream media that you can otherwise dispense with on social media. Can you highlight if somebody was to gain an appearance for comment on a breakfast television program, for instance, and representing themselves as a category and industry expert in a certain field, what are the main differences in the way in which one would present on television, for instance, than just grabbing the phone and doing a selfie video and talking?
People need to be aware that there are differences in the way you present, but also the way you put content together.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of presentation, you may be able to get away on social media with inflammatory language, disparaging language, which is quite popular, entertaining. It can be compelling to watch. It won't work on mainstream media because you're under a different rule of expectation in terms of defamation, in terms of decency. A mainstream media television breakfast program is not going to cop you your profanities.
Dropping the F-bomb or...
Correct. Won't happen.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking about a particular online influencer in the health industry who really made his mark by dropping the C-bomb in every single video he used. Now, as you say, you're not going to be able to use that attention-seeking strategy when you're on mainstream media, are you?
You're not. And you've got to probably, in terms of your presentation, you've got to be able to be acceptable to a more traditional audience, an audience that wants you to look respectable, an audience that wants you to be able to be grammatically communicative. So you've probably got to sharpen your game a little bit. You may not be able to get away with the kind of presentation you do on social media. So I think in terms of a presentation, it's about look, It's about, I think, language, but also content. A mainstream media production team is not going to employ you to come on next Wednesday morning to talk about the latest economic indicators if you don't have an appeal to a large number of their audience. If you're a little bit more of a narrowcaster, that's fine for your social media audience, but it's not going to work on mainstream media. If you have, for instance, 320,000 people watching Sunrise at any one time, which is an audience that they often record, that 320,000 people are made up of families, of children, of old people, of young parents. So you as a broadcaster on that platform have to be giving that audience, that whole audience, something that they can all consume.
And what they want.
So you've got to be a little bit more of a wider caster as opposed to the narrow caster you may have been on social media.
So I think what a lot of people forget about mainstream media is this. We're all very quick to subscribe to the notion that everyone's on social media these days. But there are actually a lot of people who don't use social media a lot. I'm very familiar with a lot of people. One in particular was speaking to over the last couple of days who said that he's removed all social media apps from.
I hear that a lot.
From his phone. But that said, there are a lot of people who have, Facebook or Instagram just for the purposes of keeping in contact, and they don't use it often. But for an online entrepreneur or for an entrepreneur who already does have this following on social media, for them to be able to move across to mainstream media, what they're actually doing is grabbing a brand new audience of consumers, because all of these people still have money and money to spend. They're getting a brand new audience of consumers. And the way those shifts have occurred between mainstream media and social media and ad spend and all that sort of stuff, what I'm noticing is that those that do transition and incorporate mainstream media as part of their focus of growing their brand are getting somewhat of a free kick with these people that they wouldn't otherwise have got. So their opportunities are today greater than they've ever been because of a perception of lack of competition. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. New users are what you should always be out to get. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. You will bleed 500,000 of your followers to a stage where you will reach that ceiling. You mentioned earlier about a ceiling that they often face. Well, the ceiling comes about because you've probably sold a package to them, an ebook to them, a webinar to them, and it gets to the stage where they can't keep spending. They themselves have got the information that they came for. It suits what their demand is at that stage of their life. So you need new audience. And the best way to get a new audience is go to a big audience, although they're a little bit more transitional and they're coming in and out and they're not as captive as what you might think your 500,000 followers are on social media. They are there. And they too are spenders. They too are interested in information. They want to be guided. They want to know about how to make a buck. So you can pour more users into your bucket by getting access to that mainstream cumulative audience. And whatever you think of mainstream media and whatever you think it's heading towards, just do not underestimate that as a pool of new users, because you will reach a ceiling with your followers at one stage and you'll wonder why.
Let's look at the strategy someone might employ where they should really give a good amount of attention into taking their brand across from social media to mainstream media. Let's just think about the entrepreneur who might run a webinar, who might spend, 20 grand, 30 grand, 50 grand on ads to try and get people to their webinar. And talking to that point that you just mentioned about this ceiling and the maximum number of people, What we're talking about here is a concept where they would use the opportunity on mainstream media exposure, be that as a commentator, a talking head, or a go-to person, to advocate the attending their webinar
Good
that they
point.
might run. Now, the opportunity to do that, if one was interviewed, for instance, on their subject, the opportunity to do that, does that always present itself?
Not always. Nothing you can describe as an always guaranteed scenario. However, almost always.
Mm-hmm.
Mainstream media still craves content. They crave new content. And I think as far as production teams that I have worked with in radio and television go, they are looking for new content as well and new people. So if you can provide an opportunity for them by saying, this is my take on this particular issue, this is where I come from, this is my expertise, they'll always be amenable to your talent.
So for context, Chris, for those who aren't familiar with the process of putting together a program, be it a television program, a radio program, you have producers looking for this content. What are they looking for, and why are they looking for it?
Well, they're always looking for something that they don't have to replicate again. Like, so often you're forced to fill time on radio, on television with the same commentators.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, some of them might be household names, and so therefore they're valued and they return. But, producers and hosts of television and radio are constantly looking for new talent, are constantly looking for someone who can put a zap back into the show, who can lift the show, who could provide some light and shade that isn't normally present in that show. People are looking for it all the time. I've had conversations this very day with my own producer about finding someone else that could come out of the UK for us.
Yeah, right.
And so we are trolling right now. We are searching and surfing every independent UK commentator we can, all the social media stars that aren't on mainstream, to pluck and use for our program tomorrow. So it happens. But getting back to what you said about your webinar, there is no problem in saying to a producer that recruits you, well, by the way, I would like, if I could, to stress that I've got a webinar coming up in a week's time, and I'd like at the end if a question could be thrown at me so I could encourage people to come for more information and more of my own wisdom at the end of the interview. That's hardly ever a problem, mate. And as a matter of fact, if that is the only thing you have to do to get this new talent to commit to being on the program, well, it's a very short commitment to make.
Let's stay on the subject of the talent itself. And let's just say that some people who have been able to build big followings on social media, they've got something. They've got that X factor about them, whether it's a charismatic charm or a capacity to articulate in a way that truly moves people or touches people. A lot of these online influencers that have reasonable sized followings have that certain something about their persona, because people buy into that persona and therefore become a following. Do you think that persona or that special something that they have can also be reflected through mainstream media in a similar way? In other words, to move, because they've got it on social media and perhaps they use profanities to accentuate that. If they were to drop the profanities and still bring with them their persona, do you think it would resonate in the same way?
If someone's got a unique shtick, which is what you're getting at, we're always looking at that. We're always enticed as production people in mainstream media to gravitate towards someone with a unique shtick. Maybe that's a comedy shtick. Maybe it's a sarcastic shtick. Maybe it's just a laconic shtick. All of those work, whether it's on social media or mainstream media.
Yeah.
But you've got to be able to show yourself off. And I think this is where social media stars need to understand that particular television, radio, newspaper, they aren't necessarily following you. You might think they should know you. You might think they should know what you're about and how successful you are, but they don't. They're full of their own self-importance, in their own game, in their own content.
So you're going to enter a domain as an unknown all of a sudden.
So, but why not send them a 2-minute show reel and an email that says, and maybe you get someone else to do that for you, which looks, I think, a lot more professional. You send someone into the fray to work for you to send these show reels of your best social media presentations with a short bio. Production people and hosts always have time to get a glimpse of what could be out there and what could actually work for their own shows. So that's what you've got to do. You've got to get out there. Don't expect that they know you or know that you're on the block.
Well, speaking more to that subject, if I'm sitting watching this video or listening to this podcast right now, and I think, wow, that's something that would really enhance my brand, my sales, my profile, venturing into mainstream media, how would I go about, who do I approach, and what do I say to them to get a start?
Well, that's what we do at Media Trainers. Without trying to sound like an ad, we actually fix people in certain sectors with the kinds of media that would be interested in what they have. Let me give you an example so it's not airy-fairy.
So perhaps you could explain how you would position online entrepreneur to a producer.
Yeah.
What wordings, what story do they need to hear to capture their attention? And perhaps by listening to that, one can transpose it into their own, email or approach that they might make.
Okay. Let me give you 2 very quick examples. A tech guru had a terrific podcast, had a certain amount of product that he was selling from the podcast because of his access to tech companies. He was doing fairly well. He came to us. He wanted us to expose him to mainstream media. He wanted to be able to get out to the regions as well. He thought that was a pool of people that weren't accustomed to the kinds of information that he had in the tech world. We introduced him to a whole series of producers in country radio stations and in a couple of newspapers. We knew people that have been in our walk of life, and we were able to say to them, this guy has talent, this guy gives you a different angle to what you may have had in the tech world. He's not talking about what's coming out of New York. He's talking about things that actually have practical sense in the tech world in Australia. You might be interested in him. And we send a 2-minute show reel to these people, and all of a sudden he's got 3 radio stations he's broadcasting to, a couple of newspapers that he contributes to on a column, and he does something that others of his ilk don't do. He marries the use of technology to that area, to farmers' use, to techniques and technology that help farmers, for instance. That's a whole echelon now that has taken off for him.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he's been on mainstream doing tech segments, and he's a charismatic guy. He's got curly hair. He's evasive. He's also got, coloured shirts. That's what he has always dressed like. He's not doing it for show. That's just
so he's
him.
not reinventing himself.
No, he's not reinventing himself. So he used to speak very quickly, which was really difficult to hear, which you can get away with on social media. You can't get away with it on mainstream media. We slowed him down. He did some Channel 7 work, and he's also doing some other radio work as well for some of the bigger cities in Australia on radio, and he's enjoying it, and he loves the radio bit in particular. And he's able to send people to his website, send them back to his podcast, and then all of a sudden he's got this running pool of people coming in and out of what he does.
Yeah, almost like a complete ecosystem.
Yeah.
But the reach he's got through doing all those sorts of things, he'd have never reached just relying on his podcast or his website or his YouTube videos.
No, and he's getting a different request for information. So all of a sudden it's influenced what he does in social media and on podcasts.
Yeah.
Because people are asking for different things.
Yeah. You're saying there were a couple of examples.
Yeah. So the other example is there's a a major furniture company that operates in Brisbane, Adelaide and Melbourne. They came to us and the same thing, that they felt that their industry was stymied by a whole heap of government red tape, and they felt that their industry was was losing out on various opportunities in the tax system, et cetera, et cetera. They came to us and said, we want to make an influence. We want to get the narrative out there that our industry in particular is being left behind and that government should watch. We want to put pressure in the media to be able to get access to the decision makers, to the head of the agriculture department, to the minister involved in this area. So we've been able to put together a whole series of press releases. After we sat down and worked out exactly what he has to say, we were able to put a whole heap of press releases out on his behalf, and he got traction in areas that he wanted to get traction. He got traction in a couple of Canberra radio stations. He's getting traction on Sky News. He's getting traction on a couple of radio programs in Sydney. And depending on the program, like not every program is going to be at all interested in what he's got to say, but some are. There are finance shows and industry shows that you can gravitate to, and all of a sudden they are interested in what you have to sell. He's not going to get on Sunrise. He's not going to get on the Today Show, but he's going to get on those that are interested in his industry and industry in general, and he's been able to get the word out. And he's now getting, behind the scenes, he's now getting his own access and people ringing him about, can we sit down and talk about what you have in mind for your industry?
Yeah,
now, nothing is, he hasn't reinvented the wheel. He hasn't changed red tape in his industry, but he's on the way to having a say in doing that.
Yeah, right. And lifting his brand as a result. These are outcomes that not just, people think about that getting outcomes like this come from working with a PR company. They don't. They come from somebody who has a bit of nous about how to present themselves in the mainstream media and how to position themselves in the mainstream
I don't
media.
want to denigrate PR companies, because there are some PR companies with wonderful media contacts in working frontline media, and there are other PR companies that don't, that have really good contacts in magazines and a little bit different. So you've got to work out who you seek help from. You talk about PR firms, that's the first instance that they go to. You've got to be very careful about selecting the right PR firm.
Yeah, yeah. Now, for a person sitting there who might be a little bit of a do-it-yourselfer and might go, well, I've got the confidence, I've got the online brand recognition, I'd like to just maybe send an email out and put my toe in the water and see if I get some sort of response from a producer of a high-rating program on television or radio. Their first thought's going to be, why the heck would a producer even read my email? The anticipation will be that person, whoever it might be, would get tons and tons of requests like mine, a bit like going for, applying for a job. It's the same thought, like, why is someone going to read my approach? Is there an insight that you could give about capturing the attention of that producer, who is actually the gatekeeper of the program?
Yeah, tough. You've virtually answered the question, really, because if you are going through 480 emails a day, which would be standard for someone producing, say, a daytime radio program in the city or or one of the morning television shows, they would get 480 to 500 emails a day.
Mm.
And 300 of those would be people saying, I've got a story for you. The 100 you do get across are ones that you recognise because you know that they've delivered for you on previous occasions. So you go to that PR firm that you can trust. You go to that fellow who works independently, who gives you really good talent or gives you great content ideas. You tend to open those emails. You only read the subject matter on all the other emails.
100%. Yeah.
That's the way it works. And so you're going to have to be really creative, and you're going to have to follow it up with a phone call. You're going to have to be persistent. You're going to have to find a person's name. All of that is really difficult to do on your own. Yes, you can try, and some people have been successful doing that themselves, but it's a tough way through because it's a closed shop in many, many, many instances. You know?
I think one of the key things, though, is to consider the perspective of the producer. Going back to what you were saying earlier, they're constantly looking. One of the things that attracts attention is controversy or looking at things outside the square or a different approach. And I would think that one way to make a better attempt is to come at your pitch from the angle of creating conflict or calling out a common myth or something like that. Is that what producers are looking for?
Yeah, sure they are. And I'm instantly thinking of a client that we had that we gave writing instructions to. She didn't want to spend money for us to go and put her in front of producers. She wanted to do it herself, but she wanted some guide. And so we were able to help her on a very basic level. But she did really well. What she did, she put together a very quick 60-second show reel of herself.
A video.
What she's done on middle grade mainstream media from time to time, 10 seconds here, 10 seconds there, 10 seconds there, which looked pretty dazzling. She was able to get someone to put it together for her, and she had that attached to various emails. But she was also able to say that this is what I do. I don't believe in this. I strongly am against that. I believe that this should be the case. She was able to show that she had passion, that she was controversial, that she was prepared to bag institutions. And she got some attention. She got on a couple of panels on Sky instantly. They were impressed with her attitude, her controversial attitude to various workplace issues. And without going into too many details or revealing who she was, she's now doing some standard stuff with various media outlets. She wants more, and she'll probably get more. But she was able to show her controversial technique, and she was able to show that she is a colourful person to have in front of a camera.
Now, Chris, I have been in years gone by an avid listener of your radio program. And I know you were a guy not frightened to ask the tough questions. And so putting yourself out on mainstream media sometimes might involve yourself having to field tough questions that may, capture you by surprise. Do you have any sort of advice about how to handle, tough or difficult questions that might truly test your confidence?
Well, the first thing to do, and this is what we do on a regular basis in our media training courses, is that we practice. If you're about to do something that you think or suspect might go in a different direction, practice answering. It's pretty simple. Get a family member or get a workmate to sit down and start asking you questions and go through the act of having that interview. Because it's best to stuff it up and work out what you can't answer and what you can answer before you actually do it live on radio or television. Really good practice does make perfect. And so doing it as a practice session is a good thing. The second thing to do is remember, you don't have to accept the premise of the question. The premise might be, but you have been involved in this in the past, and this is, well, hang on a second. You don't have to accept any premise. You can actually debate a person on the basis of, but hang on, that's not necessarily true. What I will say to you is this, and answer the question the way you want it answered. Just because they ask you, is this colour pink, doesn't necessarily mean you need to talk about the colour pink. So be careful about accepting the premise of the question and don't get sucked into that, because a lot of interviewers will try and trap you by saying that this is a fact when it doesn't necessarily mean it's a fact. And secondly, answer the question you want to have answered. Put your narrative out there. And that might be, well, forget about pink for a minute, but I really enjoy purple colours and I really have made purple my favourite colour. It's a kindergarten way of saying find out the answers you want people to hear and answer the question the way you want to have their question answered. Quite often they won't come back, oh, I didn't ask that question. Well, if they've got long-form interview time, they might ask you the question again, but that's rarely the case.
Yeah. And I suppose that by doing that practice and being well rehearsed, one can turn those complicated questions into an opportunity.
Yes.
Where they can win the favour of the audience watching by, eliciting some sort of an answer that leaves the audience going, yeah, good answer.
And this gets back to the beginning of this interview, Mark, where we talk about why go to mainstream. There are a lot of people in social media who are scared of going to mainstream because of the pure knowledge that you put on the spot by professionals. You're not directing the ship the way you would normally do on a podcast. It's strange, it's foreign territory, it's scary territory. People have got to have a different mindset. They've got to see these as opportunities of a lifetime to be able to pour another 500,000 people into where you operate is an opportunity of a lifetime. See it as an opportunity. And if you are practicing properly and are prepared for that interview, you'll be able to handle it well because you're doing well on your social media podcast. There is no reason why you can't do it well on mainstream media too.
Yeah, got it. Chris, people watching, I'm sure they're impressed by your 40 years of wisdom compartmentalised into one podcast. How can they reach someone like you?
Well, the best thing is to go to, we've got a Media Trainers website. There's a contact page there for people to ask questions or even to inquire as to whether they would like us to help them go to a next step, whatever that next step might be. It might be getting their narrative out there. It might be getting their product out there. It might necessarily be introducing them to mainstream media or training to be prepared to present on mainstream media. We do all of that. And they can just go to themediatrainers.com.au, themediatrainers.com.au and contact us through that.
Got it. Now, the final question I have for you is, of course, when anyone's putting themselves out there, they're stepping outside of their comfort zone. There'd be a lot of people who would feel that perhaps they don't have the full-on expertise required of a mainstream media performance. What would your comment be in relation to people thinking, maybe I won't go in that direction for fear of this imposter syndrome perhaps overwhelming them and being concerned that, well, I'm an expert, but not that much of an expert?
Oh, look, I always believe that you should fake it before you make it. If you've got a dream about breaking into mainstream media and being a household name, why sit back and wonder? Why wonder? Give it a go. Have a go. You're probably doing things now that you wouldn't have expected you'd ever do 20 years ago.
That's true, isn't it?
I often think about the things that I've done in my life, the exceptional things, and I think, imagine if I was told that was where I would head 20 years ago. Not a chance in the world. Well, the same thing operates with your fear of mainstream media. Have a go. Fake it before you make it because so many other people have.
Yeah, got it. Chris, it's been tremendous value picking your brains over this last hour or so. I really appreciate your time and thank you so much for your insights. I genuinely, and on behalf of the audience, appreciate the time that you've given, but more importantly, the inspiration and insight into taking that extra leap and leveraging mainstream media to grow your brand. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Good fun. Thank you, mate.